Horror movies have notoriously taken on an unserious tone, so much so that they are not even recognized in award ceremonies within the Hollywood sphere. I can't tell you how many actors and actresses I genuinely believe have been snubbed for some of the best performances I've seen in any genre of movie. Pretending to be scared and give a viscerally real performance of terror is just as hard, if not harder, than pretending to be in love. However, time and time again, so many great actors and actresses, as well as passionate directors, just end up getting overlooked despite their talent and storytelling. It's time for Hollywood to admit that horror isn't what it used to be. Not that horror was ever bad or had any reason to be overlooked in the first place, but continuing to act as if horror hasn't consistently made great leaps and strides within filmmaking to create a connection with the audience that is sometimes greater than any love story, comedy, or drama is being disingenuous, and ultimately does a disservice to filmmakers and filmmaking. I would even go further and say that the stories being told in horror about love, sadness, grief, trauma, and overall the human condition are being done in a way that surpasses the way that other genres tell their story. I think today's horror is the most refined we've ever been with a genre. Horror was always about storytelling in the world we live in. I even made an entire video about the stories these movies sometimes tell based on each decade that you can watch here, but I don't think it always knew what story it was trying to tell. I feel like many of the movies lacked awareness of the genre's potential cultural impact. Scaring people with gore and shock took precedent. Maybe even a little mystery would be injected for scare factor. This is not to say that all movies prior to the more serious tonal shift in horror were just mind-numbing killing or ghosts chasing people, but most movies treated their more introspective ideas as secondary concerns, using characters mostly as fodder for the audience to hate or lean into. Now we see characters that are more dynamic and fleshed out in a way that makes them relatable to the average viewer. Stories are told passionately and it makes them feel intertwined with your real life. Sure, there will always be gore and jump scares, but they are done thoughtfully instead of just haphazardly placed in a spot that might get the audience. We had a pretty annoying time in the 2010s with the jump scare epidemic, and I'm super glad that's over because it was very annoying. Loud noises and random people coming into frame isn't scary, and it never will be. You can't convince me otherwise. To be honest, I'm not sure when the shift in horror came. In the early days of horror, think like Nosferatu and Frankenstein in 1922 and 1930, the genre seemed to focus mostly on monsters. Why? I have no idea, but my best guess would be that these movies were explaining the inner workings of humanity. So we started out there and worked our way around. It seems that horror sort of enters into phases or seasons. From the 20s and 30s psychological horror into the flashier era of 50s and 60s, where marketing gimmicks took center stage and we see low-budget films start to make their way in. As time goes on, seasons change and the focus of horror did as well. Slashers and comedic horror started to make headway. As I've said, I made an entire video on the subject of horror through the decades, so I don't want to rehash that. You get the idea over there. Somewhere along the way, we got into the early 2000s, and it seemed like Hollywood had no idea what the state of horror would or should be. It was as if we had seen horror through all of its seasons, and audiences were getting a little bit bored. Clearly, it was time for some new blood, and horror needed to shed its skin beyond the formulaic ghost stories and slashers and mysteries. It needed some fresh content to revive its kind of dead existence. And I believe this came in like 2010 or so. So this is when we started into the drama era, into the trauma era of horror. The millennial teen had grown up, and now we wanted a more grown-up approach to horror. We loved horror, but it needed to grow with us, and we wanted to bathe in the existence of our problems, apparently. We wanted movies that were burned into our souls. We wanted to be uncomfortable because that's what growing up meant. Discomfort, family drama, loss, grief, dealing with things we could easily ignore as children, all laid bare on the screen in the most profound way as a horror. Maybe we were just scared of getting older. I don't know. I'm saying millennial and we because at the time we sort of started to dictate the landscape of movies by going and watching them. And now we're seeing movies for a new audience, which is Gen Z, but we really paved the way in tandem with Gen Z to a more sophisticated approach to horror. I recently watched Oddity and I thought, Jesus, if I had seen this when I was younger, I would have been terrified of horror movies. I mean, genuinely, some of the movies that I see now as an adult stick with me to my core. I felt that when I was a kid, but it was different. I had a very active imagination and I was pretty scared of ghosts. And there were a lot of paranormal movies at the time. So I still have a very active imagination, but when I watch horror movies, there is so much left unsaid in today's horror movies that my imagination can't help but go bonkers even as an adult. Anyway, the genre has become what I feel is the best version of itself, and that's because it has fully become enmeshed with drama. It has the emotional impact of drama and the tangibility of horror, and what I mean by the tangibility of horror is that being scared is such a distinctive feeling. It's one that's easy to pinpoint. There are biological sensations that kind of go haywire when you're scared, and when that's coupled with drama, it heightens all of these feelings that are being felt, which often makes for a more memorable experience and a more impactful experience. Horror movies have also learned that what isn't seen is sometimes more impactful than creating a monster. But I digress. The point is that horror has become a mainstream genre. There's something deeper there that mainstream audiences are interested in. The plots are thicker, the cinematography is inventive and beautiful, and the ideas are weaved together in the most entertaining and cinematic way. That's amazing, and I love this for us. Horror needed to start going deeper. It was on the table and nobody was taking advantage until I feel like there was a turning point. I mean, people were taking advantage, but at this point, a lot of people are taking advantage. A lot of people are seeing the potential with the genre. But I also wonder if there will be a fatigue and a slingshot in the other direction, possibly toward a more comedic tone in horror. It's always been a nice marriage between drama and horror, but I wonder if the societal bleakness will counteract this movement toward a more serious tone, and if we'll just end up going back to the unserious slasher genre flicks of the 90s. It's also become incredibly popular to nostalgia bait, so that lends credibility to the possibility that we may start to see more studios heading toward a more upbeat tone when it comes to horror movies, or a less cerebral tone. I think it's also hard to compete with the bleak reality we all already live in right now, and that the trend could end up becoming escapism rather than mirroring what we see in today's society. Either way, I'm very glad to be a part of this most recent movement toward a serious tone in horror. I think some of the most poignant films from the last decade have come from the horror genre, and that's something we don't always see, or we haven't always seen. I'm pretty excited to see what a director like Jordan Peele or Ari Aster could do to blend into the new season of horror when it comes in full force. Will we get a slasher from them? Because that'd be very interesting. I know that Peele seems to be going very hard on the cerebral horror within his production company, Monkey Paw. Him looks like it's going to be intense and psychological and thrilling. So I'm excited to see that. I know Ari Aster also said that his next movie is going to be back to the horror genre, so I'm excited to see what he does there with all these new realities that we are living in. Osgood Perkins is also a heavy hitter on the scene now, and it looks like Keeper is going to be masterful. It looks like it's a paranormal story, so I'm excited to see that because I don't feel like we've been getting too many paranormal stories. We've been seeing a lot of relationships in horror, and think of something like Together, which was more body horror, but also related to the relationship aspect of horror. And it looks like Osgood's movie is also going to be a relationship dynamic. Obviously, the Phillipou brothers have just cemented themselves, or just about cemented themselves, as a powerhouse in horror. Chris Stuckman is coming out with his first horror flick. I will say that it looks slightly less psychological and more rooted in like lore, and I'm excited for that because I want to see the genre go through these different spaces in horror with its new depth. Either way, I think that the horror genre has become a powerhouse, and it's not stopping anytime soon. In fact, this is just the beginning of horror's hard stomp into the mainstream movie scene. With movie studios like A24 and Neon, there lives endless potential for horror to thrive. Larger studios just aren't cutting it when it comes to pushing out grounded horror movies that we're seeing from these niche studios today. And with the advent of YouTube and the ability to make more cinematic quality movies from home with the right equipment, we're going to start seeing more and more YouTubers and independent filmmakers come onto the scene. We've learned as an audience how to wield the studios, and we are starting to expect more from all films in general, but especially horror, because this year has been full of good quality horror, and I think it's setting the pace for possibly the next few years of horror movies. Anyway, if you liked this ranting video about horror, subscribe. I post trailer reaction videos on Wednesday, and I post normal videos like this, deep dives, and concept videos on Fridays. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.